So as Emil said, we're here today to learn about assets. And I'm pretty sure throughout the talks already you've been asked to put your hand up a lot to signify a lot of things. I'm going to do that again, but a little different. Just want to get everyone to put your hand up. Just everyone in the audience, give me a wave. Yeah, everyone with their hand up is hopefully going to learn something new today. And I want to stress that it doesn't matter if you already know about developing on the cloud or you're just looking at building your first cloud app, whether you know about assets or you've not heard about them at all, and whether you know about Jira and Jira Service Desk or you're kind of learning about these things for the first time, we're going to learn about all of it together. And all you need to understand what I'm talking about today is a story. So I want to tell you a story about Leo. Leo works as an agent in Jira Service Desk. So he works in a service team, he's fielding requests from people in his organization, and so every day he comes into Jira Service Desk and looks at the tickets, looks at the tasks that he has to do. And today, he gets a request from Nahul, and she needs help. Things are going drastically wrong. Everything is running slowly. You've had those days where you're just not sure if everything's going to crash. You open Chrome, it closes. You open an app, everything is slow. She's having one of those days. So she's asking Leo for help. And so Leo comes and takes a look at the ticket. And the first thing that strikes him is that he doesn't actually know what device she's talking about. She has a laptop and a desktop, and it's not quite clear. So he fires a comment to ask her, what device is malfunctioning at the moment? She says, oh, it's my laptop. He's like, OK, good, first clue. So now he thinks, well, OK, what could be wrong with this laptop? Could be anything. So he goes and looks at a spreadsheet, see what information he knows. When was it purchased? How old is it? What OS is it running? All this kind of information. And the confusing thing is that he finds out it's only a 6-month-old laptop. It's basically brand new. There should be nothing going wrong with it. So he's a bit puzzled. He goes back and he asks Nahul, OK, is this a new problem? Has this happened before? Can you give me some more information about it? So he goes and adds a comment on the ticket and gets a response. She says, yeah, it's happened before, and I've actually raised tickets about this before and had it troubleshooted. So now he knows, OK, well, I can go into Jira Service Desk and look at previous tickets that have been raised, scrolls through all the different tickets and finds some about the laptop and sees, oh yeah, it's had these kind of slow issues, crashing, trouble connecting to the printer in the past. Just seems like it's not quite right. Maybe it's an issue with the hardware, and I need to send it back to the manufacturer. So he goes back to his spreadsheet and sees if there's a warranty on the device, finds out that there is. Cool, it's under warranty. Good, because it's only 6 months old. And so, OK, he decides, I'll resolve this ticket by sending the device off for warranty. I'll ask Nahul to bring it up. I'll put that on the ticket, and I'll update the spreadsheet to say we're going to send this one out. Maybe he grabs a replacement laptop for her as well and gives her that, and they can get on with their day. This is just one request. One request in Leo's day has this many back and forth context-switching diversions. And if at any point here he's waiting on a response and he gets distracted by something else, a lot of that context is lost. And this is really a big pain point for agents in Jira Service Desk, but also any knowledge workers working across Jira. And so with the Jira Cloud Assets API, one of our goals was to drastically simplify this into something that looks more like this. And I know that seems like it's a bit of a worldly goal, but I'm actually going to show you right now how you can achieve a service interaction that is this simple using the Assets API in Jira Service Desk. So the talk today is going to focus on these 4 parts. First, we're going to look into the product, get you to actually see Jira and Jira Service Desk and where the Assets API surfaces information throughout this kind of service flow. Then the big chunk of the talk is I'm going to step through that flow and give you every bit of information that you need to know to go and build a Connect app using this API. So we're going to step through all the major components that you need to know, the different objects and the different relationships, APIs, everything. Once I somehow get through that in 40 minutes and have time to spare, we're going to look at extending the experience a little bit further. Everything up until this point will focus on Jira, but we know not all work happens in Jira. So we're going to look at how you can extend that experience into other products using your APIs. And finally, I want to make sure you know what to do next. So the next steps for you going forward once you've left this session today. So let's start with that asset-powered experience and see how we can really cut all that awful back and forth and context switching out of a workflow. So we started with Nahul coming and raising a request in Jira Service Desk. For those unfamiliar, this is the Jira Service Desk customer portal. So she comes in and is raising a request for desktop support or laptop support. And within the request fields, there's a special field here, the devices field, where she can see the two devices that she has. She has a laptop and a desktop. And so right from when she's creating the ticket, she can give the agent the context that they need to know which device she's talking about. And if you're familiar with Jira, you might be thinking, oh, this could be any custom field. But we'll see that it's a special custom field. Because when this request then lands in Jira, and Leo takes a look at what he's working with, he can see this devices field. And within that, can see the MacBook that she selected. When he clicks on this, it opens up to show a whole range of really useful information in the glance. And of course, this is the new issue view. This all works the same in the old issue view as well. So he can see all the information that he was looking for in the spreadsheet before. The data was purchased, the RAM, the warranty on it. And he can also see a link to other issues that have been previously raised on this device. If he goes and clicks on that, he can see all the details of these previously created tickets. All that troubleshooting information is there at his fingertips. And boom, it's already ready to leave a comment and resolve the ticket. This is like 30 seconds worth of work. All of this context within Jira, not going anywhere else. And as a bonus, even after leaving this comment saying, it's resolved, come bring me your laptop, he can pull a replacement device off, and in another field, he can add that device's information to the ticket, so we know exactly which laptop was given as a loan. Can go and search for the asset, type in its barcode, for example, and then add that information to the ticket as well. And so you can see how simple this interaction can be. The request was raised, all the information was done within Jira, and then it was resolved in one go. And this is really why I was so excited to work on this API. It's a real opportunity to make agents' lives way more bearable. But it's something that we have to do together. So this only works if you build an app that uses this API. And I'll show you now exactly how you can do that. This is the real meat of the talk. So we're going to step through it bit by bit, and hopefully it all makes sense. When you're building this experience, there's kind of two sides. There's our side and your side. This is really, truly a partnership of integration. On your side, all you need is a Connect app. In this case, we'll use the key com.myasset.app to reference your Connect app where it's mentioned, and a store of information of assets. And this can be any kind of data store, but presumably you have some knowledge sitting somewhere that you want to bring into Jira. And then on our side, we have the Assets API, and it's composed of three main things. We have a store on our side, where our assets live. And we also have the custom field that you saw when the request was raised and within the Jira issue view. And then we have that panel that shows all that really rich detail from within the Jira issue. And this is it. But because there is a lot that you can do with this, we're going to break it down further and look at kind of three big steps that your app needs to take, or three main flows that you need to know about. So first, we'll look into syncing assets and what that means. Then we'll look further into the custom field, and finally look at that enriched issue view. So let's start with syncing assets. In this section, we're going to focus on pretty much just your store and our store, because the process of syncing assets is just your app writing data into Jira. That's it. It's just writing data. Sounds like it should be simple, right? But of course, it's important what data you're writing. And there are two main objects. Well, no, there's just two objects, but they're both very important. Two objects that you need to write into our store. You might have guessed that the first one is an asset. Makes sense, right? And in our example so far, we've really focused on IT-centric asset use cases, laptops, hardware, software. And we'll continue to do so. But keep in mind that an asset can be anything of value to a company, which is why I've got $signs. It can be absolutely anything that is valuable to someone using Jira. As well as assets, the other object we're concerned with is types. And you can think of types like boxes or categories. Don't think of them like labels, and I'll tell you why. The relationship between an asset and a type is like a box. You can put an asset into one type box, but you can't put it into multiple. So an asset can only have one type. And this is the first of 3 key relationships to understand when you're writing data and you're syncing assets. An asset can have one type. So it can be a laptop, or it can be a desktop, or it can be a license. But it can never sit in 2 of those boxes. The second relationship that we're concerned with works quite similarly. And this is the relationship between an asset and a user. So you think back to Nahul being able to raise a request and see just her assets. The way that we achieve this is that we need to assign an asset to a user. So again, an asset can only have one assigned user. So it can either belong to one person or another. And that person can have assets of different types. So they can have a laptop and a desktop. The third relationship that we're concerned with is between the asset in our store and the asset in your data store. And because these objects should just exist in both, this is a simple one-to-one relationship. So we must maintain this relationship between assets that we store and your app and its identifier for this. And of course, we do all this using simple REST APIs. Don't worry if you don't get too much detail from this. I will put a link to the documentation at the end, and it's actually very comprehensive. But you have 2 simple write APIs, or put APIs, for the types and the assets themselves. First, you need to write the asset type, and you need to give it an identifier. We identify this by your app key for your Connect app, and then a simple numeric or alphanumeric identifier. And as well, you can give it a human-readable value. So whatever that type actually means to people using your app, whether it's a laptop, a software license, et cetera. And then you use that identifier that you set when creating the type to give that type relationship when you're creating your asset. So when you're writing an asset, you specify the type using that identifier, and then you also specify the assignee. You can do this by either specifying the account ID of the user, or you can specify their email address. And this will create that relationship between the asset and the assignee. And finally, as we did with the type, you identify the origin, so the data, real source data of this asset. And you do this similarly by using the app key for your Connect app and an alphanumeric identifier for the origin ID. And then again, you give it a human-readable label value, which is what appears in product. That's really the hard work done. Once you think about syncing assets into the product, a lot of what your app is responsible for is done. But it's really important that you understand what data you're writing and the relationships that you're creating when you do that. So now you know how to sync assets into the store. We can go on to look at how that data is actually used within Jira. And in this section, there's actually nothing that your app needs to do. Because for the custom field, everything happens on our side. But it's really, really important for you as an app developer to understand how this works, and also, especially for solutions partners, how you can help end customers set up their instances to make the most use of this custom field. So the custom field searches against the asset store that you've just synced assets to. And it can do some really powerful and interesting things via this search. Also, throughout this section, I want you to keep in mind that everything the custom field can do via search, you can do via search as well. So if you're familiar with Jira, which I assume a lot of you are, you should be familiar with custom fields. But custom fields are a really powerful part of Jira. It allows you to add data to an issue that might relate to users or labels, text fields, checkboxes. It's really cool. What we did is we added a new kind of custom field that is specific to linking and showing information about assets on Jira issues. And so this is the custom field that can search against the asset store and then link those assets to an issue. And it uses those 3 relationships that we defined in the beginning to achieve some really cool things. The first one is the relationship between the asset and the type, allows you to have custom fields that are filtered to search only assets of a particular type. So you can imagine you can create multiple of these asset custom fields, one that searches just against laptops, one against software licenses, and this allows you to use these fields in different contexts, different issue types, different places where people do work, completely different teams even. I apologize that I have to show you some configuration, but I think it is important for you to see exactly how to add custom fields if you've never done it before. And I actually don't think it's that painful. And if you were in the talk before about NextGen, it gets easier. But this is how you add a custom field. We're in the Jira Global settings. When you go to all, you see this new assets custom field type. From there, you just give it a name. You type poorly like I do. You create your assets field. Then you add it to the screens of whatever projects you want it to be on. In my case, I have a service desk with the key ISD, so I just add it to all the screens. I don't know what they do. Add it to all those screens, and now I've got a custom field of the assets type. But I can go ahead and configure that. So if I now search for the field that I just created, I can go ahead to the little meatball menu and configure that. And as part of this configuration, I can add a filter. And I can add that filter for, you guessed it, asset types. So here we see those label values of the types that we synced earlier. So I can see that I want to add laptops and desktops to this field, but software licenses don't make much sense for where I'm going to use this, so I just add those two. So only assets of those type will ever show up in search. And that's it. And you can see the types that you configured on this screen here. Now, if you want to use this in Jira Service Desk and from the customer portal, there's one extra step to make sure that this appears in the customer portal. So in classic projects, you do need to go to the request type that you want, in my case, desktop and laptop support, and add that device's custom field into the portal. But with those kind of 3 steps, creating the custom field, configuring it with type filters, and then adding it to the customer portal, you get everything for free. The second thing that you can do with the custom field and the search that it performs is you can restrict it or prioritize it to only show assets that belong to a particular assignee. And so this is where it becomes really useful in the customer portal. So when that request was being raised earlier, Nahul could only see her assets. She could also only see assets of the types that we defined, so it respects both restrictions in this case. A caveat, it does also show any unassigned assets. For example, if you wanted to use this to allow people to raise requests against printers or meeting rooms that don't necessarily belong to anyone, you can leave them unassigned and they will all show. But in this case, that's why we've got this kind of funny IT loan user assigned to the loaner laptops so that they don't appear in this dropdown. So this is what appears to the help seeker. They have this restricted search so they can only see assets that are theirs, because that's the only thing that makes sense for them to raise requests on, not anyone else's. Conversely, once we get into the agent side or the Jira side, you can see a lot more information. And so Leo, as a help seeker, is able to see anyone's assets. Again, they have to apply that type filter restriction, but he can see anyone's assets. And this means that if he wanted to add assets from any other user in different fields, if it made sense for any reason, he could do so. But these are prioritized by the reporter of the ticket. So if he just wasn't comfortable with letting her pick her own device when she was raising the ticket, all of Nahul's devices will appear at the top of that search so that they're easier to be selected. And the third relationship that we use in the custom field is that link between the asset in our store and the original data source. And this is the value that we store when we're creating, when we're adding it to the field, or when you're creating a request with an asset value and an asset field. We use the app key with a slash and then the origin ID as a single string identifier for those assets. And this is important because once this is stored against an issue, this is what powers us to then show that data in the next section. We've gone through a lot so far. To recap a little, you should know now how to create assets in the platform, create assets and asset types, and create the 3 relationships between types, users, and the original data source and your assets in our system. And we've seen how the custom field searches across all that data and uses that to make experiences that actually make sense, particularly for help seekers and agents. Now, the really valuable part, which is bringing all of that really great contextual information into the Jira issue view. So now you've got assets linked to your issue. Your app comes back into focus, but because the data is already kind of mapped to the issue, we don't need the store anymore. All we need are your app, the panel, and the custom field. And there's kind of two things at part here. The value stored in the custom field is what we use to identify which asset to expand information for. And then that expanded information is all provided by your Connect app. You guessed it, it's all in an iframe, and it's defined in a Connect module. But this really allows you to do something fantastic, which is render whatever information you want to show about an asset that is linked to a Jira issue within this custom field panel in the glance. Any information is completely under your control. Whatever makes sense for people using your integration, you can show. And for the use case, we saw some pretty cool things. So to refresh, this is the Jira issue view, and on the right-hand side here is where the custom field and the glance show up. Defining this in your Connect app is as simple as adding a module. Again, this is all well documented online. But the thing that I wanted to call out here that you can do that I actually didn't know about until I started building an asset app of my own for this talk is you can pass these context parameters across in the URL. So the URL you define is what we hit to bring back the iframe and render that. And within that URL, you can pass query parameters, which are contextual. And there are some that are specific to assets that are really useful. There's, of course, the app key and origin ID to identify your particular asset. And then you can also pass the field name and the field ID for the particular custom field that was created. And something cool that you can do with that is you can build that link to the related issues using JQL. And it just needs those three context parameters that we passed across. So with those three, you can create a contextual URL for the site in which you're installed with a JQL query parameter, and you can build Jira query language search query, yeah, with those two things to show all other related tickets where that particular asset has been linked in that particular field. And this is what allows you to show all other troubleshooting issues for that device that the request was raised for before. As well as that, you can render fields however you like. We definitely recommend that you use AtlasKit for this because it does allow you to have fields that look very similar to the to the Jira ticket that you're within, because it has all the same look and style. And if you were interested in checking out one in particular, one I think is really cool is inline edit, because this would enable you to do things from within your glance, like update your other data store, update your spreadsheet. So not just the reading and the getting information in context, but also writing information out, changing the status of the device that you're working on, changing the assignment of that loan device, all from just within the Jira issue view. I think it's a pretty cool thing for you to be able to do. We've gotten through all the hard stuff. Now this is actually pretty much, in my opinion, the core of the Jira Cloud Assets API story. And everything that we've seen that's within the Jira issue view particularly, remember it applies to Jira Core and Jira Software as well. But as much as I love Jira, not everything happens within Jira, I know. So something that's also great for you to look at is what you can do beyond Jira in different apps where people are actually doing work as well. And this all rests really on the search API. So everything that the custom field did before, all the searches that were restricting by assignee or prioritizing by assignee or filtering by type, you can achieve all of that using the search API yourself. All of this is available to you. And one cool example that we've seen of this is a Slack bot that allows requests to be raised against problematic devices. So here, you can engage with the bot and say that you want to report an issue. The bot can go off and search for all of your assets and display those into the chat. You can then select the one that's problematic and raise the request against it there. By using our search API, you have the identifier to then pass into the custom field when you're creating the request, and it's as simple as that. And this is just one example. I really encourage you to kind of get as crazy as you want of where you could surface this assets information in different apps. So OK, that's a lot. What do you actually go and physically do now? There's really two things that I want to encourage you to do. One is to check out our documentation. I think it's almost rare for a developer to encourage people to go to their docs, but I actually think my team has put a lot of effort into our documentation for the assets particularly. So head to developer.atlassian.com/cloud/asset API, and we have guides that include kind of a slimmed-down version of the overview I've given today, as well as everything you need to get started. And this presumes zero knowledge about Atlassian Connect and cloud development. It'll tell you how to get set up creating a cloud site, how to run a basic server, how to create your Connect descriptor, everything that you need to know to get started. And of course, we also have reference documentation for those APIs and the Connect module as well. And hopefully, these are quite detailed. But I don't just want you to go off into your corner, read our docs, and write your apps. I really, really do want you to come and talk to me. Something that my team has really enjoyed doing lately is partnering with a lot of vendors. This is a kind of app discovery project that we shipped recently, where we added a page within Jira Service Desk projects to showcase relevant apps. And these are all apps that we believe help our mutual customers to just get their shit done. So we're really interested to know what apps you're building, what problems you're trying to solve, and hopefully we can work together to allow customers to find those apps and solve their problems with them. And we're not the only ones who think that these apps are great. So the Assets API was actually launched last year at Atlas Camp as a beta program. And since then, we've been working closely with vendors building apps. We've been getting a lot of feedback. And we've finally gotten to the point where there are some popular apps in the marketplace, and we're getting reviews for those. And some of these reviews are really impressive. People understand the value in reducing this context switching, bringing their asset management and their Jira apps closer together to allow them to get their work done. And they know that these integrations provide them with value. Perfect is a very wonderful adjective, but for them it was perfect. And this is a really fantastic thing to see as a developer. And it's not just traditional asset management that they're using this for. People are sometimes taking asset management apps and using them for completely different use cases, because everything that I've described today is actually quite a broad and generic platform. It's taking another data source and allowing you to show extra information about that data in a Jira ticket at its simplest. So I encourage you, now that you're ready, to go out and actually discover what you can do with this API. And come and talk to me and my team about it. I have some business cards here, which I could give you my email. We would really, really love to hear from you. There are some things that we know we can do to make this easier. For you, for example, that configuration of the custom field, we do automate some of that if we know about your app. So we can kind of whitelist your app key and automatically create an asset custom field for you. And there's a whole lot of other things that we'd be interested in doing to make building apps an interesting and better experience for you. Thank you.